King Cyrus II, of Persia, was referred to as the Anointed One, or as a pseudo-Mashiach that would be used by God, who listened to God. Namely, the reading of these passages here during Jewish exile during that time, to let Ezra and the remnant of Jews, the hope of Israel, to return to Jerusalem, and then continue teaching and reading the Torah and sacrificial offerings and cleansing of the temple. There's nothing in here about Jesus. Shalom. This is Hakam Yara ben-Emmett with the Torah Watchman Show with another video short topic of interest about Christian beliefs, about the Torah and the Tanakh and the sacred writings and the prophets. I want to thank everyone recently for clicking like and subscribe on my YouTube channel. Register through yaraben-Emmett@gmail.com. If you want to email me, send me a question. I encourage everyone, Jew or Gentile, whatever religion you have or indifferent, please comment. I'm not going to block anything that I consider that's not true. I would encourage honest, sincere, and loving comments from everyone. I don't know everything. I never claimed to know everything. But I want to address one of the comments I had very recent, last 24 hours. And it's centered around a group of passages in Isaiah chapter 8, namely verses 13 through 15. However, to understand the context of a prolific prophet, Navi like Isaiah, you have to understand what he's talking about, how he speaks in that time or era in ancient Israel, during the times when northern Israel was about to be carried off in Assyria, the warnings of the prophet Isaiah to various kings, not some so righteous and some very evil, the admonishments of this nature. Isaiah, 90% of the 66 chapter book per se, or the Isaiah scroll, 90% of it is poetry, and it's very difficult to understand. It goes back and forth through past and present and future. There's some historical context there, but most of it, beautiful poetic poetry, prophecy that people just don't speak this way anymore. Isaiah was a very rare type of prophet. Now, God did not speak to him face to face like Moshe. No one has, and no one else will. But God used Isaiah to be a sounding piece. Like, for instance, Moshe uses Aaron before the Pharaoh as a sounding piece. So when God spoke, Isaiah spoke. Occasion in a subconscious state, trance or whatever. When Isaiah was speaking, it was like God was speaking mouth to mouth to the kings of Israel and to the Jewish people. So turn with me in your Old Testament. Hopefully you have very astute word-for-word translation, whatever it is, between Hebrew and English. I use Art Scroll Tanakh as my favorite choice. I also go to Chabad and my Jewish learning and Sophia and other Jewish sources out there to make sure I have the proper context and the proper translation. Because, I was born in America, so my native tongue was not Hebrew. I'm still building up that vocabulary. I could read and translate Hebrew left and right, but those words and the vernacular and grammar is still, I need to do study with that to understand when you go to English, a lot of things are lost. Many people have said before, when you translate or try to read anything that's intended to be read in Hebrew, that was given by the prophets in Hebrew, it's like kissing God through a towel. Let's get started. In Isaiah chapter 8, we're talking about a time in Israel of great evil. I'm talking about sorcery, necromancy, idolatry, polytheism, namely in the northern part of Israel. If you remember quickly, King Solomon's son did a great foobar. He sinned a great sin. He overtaxed and was very harsh with the people of Israel. And they broke away, civil war conflict. We had civil war in our country. So you understand what happens when people cannot reach some sort of diplomatic agreement. But anyway, you had 9.5 tribes literally in the northern part of Israel, north of Benjamin and Yehuda, in Jerusalem, and that southern part of Israel. If you could read in Isaiah chapter 17, verse 14 and 15, Christians, even though it's not in their New Testament, but their evangelists and pastors and missionaries point out this is talking about the Messiah, it's talking about the Christ child to be born in the future, the virgin birth and everything else. Well, the same characters that Isaiah was speaking to, namely King Ahaz, a very evil king, but he had a very righteous son, Hezekiah, or known also as Immanuel, which means God is with us. So that's the context here. Like I said, to read Isaiah, you cannot just take 2 or 3 verses or read Isaiah 53 and say it's about the suffering Messiah if you don't read the chapters leading up to that. And then after chapter 53, like 54, read 42, 43, and so on to understand proper context. Unless you have an agenda to mess with my Bible and make it something that it was never intended to be, Christological. So in verse 1, and the Lord said to me, and literally God said this to Isaiah to give to the Jewish people, take for yourself a large scroll, and this is actually the implementation of the prophecy, and write on it a common script, something that everyone would understand, okay? To hasten loot and speed the spoils, okay? Stay with me. Verse 2, and I will call to testify for myself trustworthiness, righteous witnesses beyond reproach, such as Uriah the priest and Zechariah the son of Jebekiah, okay? These are historical figures. You can look them up on Wikipedia. So in verse 3, and I intimate with the prophetess, and she conceived, and she bore a son, and the Lord said to me, call his name Maher Shalal Hashbaz. Folks, this is to the prophetess that Isaiah is talking about is none other than the bride-to-be of Isaiah. They were married and had a child. If you read in Isaiah 7, chapter 7, verse 14 through 15, you will read about this proclamation. Isaiah told King Ahaz, you see that woman over there, she's with child. Well, it wasn't just any woman. This is the prophetess that was married to the prophet, the Navi Isaiah. But I just gave you his name. He went by other names like Immanuel. In verse 4, for when the lad does not yet know to call father, Abba, Ima, mother, the wealth of Damascus, which is the capital, Syria today, don't get confused Syria and Assyria. And so there were 2 countries in play here. There was Syria and Assyria that was against Israel, okay? And it was a coming invasion to deport and exile all the northern tribes. But anyway, you're talking about the plunder of Samaria, which is northern Israel, Ephraim, and to be carried off before the king of Assyria. So there's many dirty agreements going on between the northern king of Israel and these tribute states and other foreign powers, and it ended up coming back to destroy them. And this is how God works. There's a lot of evil in the land of northern Israel, Samaria, what do you want to call it. That was going on. And the admonishment that Isaiah was speaking about were against these evil people. Not per se the Jews and priests and other administration officials that lived in Judea. Ahaz lived a certain amount of time, and then his son Hezekiah or Immanuel would take his place. So verse 5, God explains himself. And the Lord continued to speak to me further, saying, since the people has rejected the waters of Shiloh and that flowed gently, and rejoiced and risen, and the son of Ramallah. He's making a poetic comparison. To verse 7, he said, therefore, behold, the Lord is bringing up on them the mighty and massive waters of the river, the king of Assyria, and all his wealth. The rivers is talking about none other than hundreds of thousands of soldiers, okay, that will be crossing into the land of northern Israel very soon. And then, in time of King Hezekiah, to actually try to breach the walls of Jerusalem. So you hear this. rivers of peace and safety, shepherding and things of this nature. Then you have great rivers that actually are not nourishing, but are armies of men coming in to destroy and to evade northern Israel. So in verse 8, and it will penetrate into Yehudah, overflowing as it passes through up to the neck of the reach and the tips of the wings, and it will feel the breath of your land, Immanuel. So this is a warning to Immanuel, the future king of Israel, that will replace the evil king Ahaz, maybe one of the most evil of all kings that's ever lived. Verse 9, join together, O peoples, and be broken. Hearken, all of you distant countries, gird yourselves, and the broken, gird yourselves and be broken. Verse 10, take counsel and it will be foiled. Speak a word and it will be succeed, for God is with us. That means Immanuel. Verse 11, so has the Lord spoken to me with the overwhelming power of prophecy. And he admonished me from going in the way of his people, saying, you shall not call a band together that his people calls a band, and you shall not fear what it fears, nor attribute strength to it. Isaiah, as a very young man, before he got married to the prophetess and conceived the son of Hezekiah, he got in trouble with being just too bold and too brash, because he spoke out of alignment of God's prophecy and admonished the people. You remember the story of seraphim, a vision of seraphim coming from heaven, taking coals from the altar of heaven, and then touching his lips and tongue and cleansing him from this, and formally anointing him to be the prophet of Israel. That's what it's talking about. So he's rehashing something he said before. People do not listen. People are stubborn. They're just as stubborn. People are just as stubborn today as they were back then. Verse 13, the Lord of hosts, him, which is God, Jehovah Elohim ha-Emet, our God of truth, and everyone agrees that it's true, you sanctify, and he is your fear, and he gives you strength. When Jews translate from Hebrew to English, there's no capitalization at all in Hebrew, okay? But when you translate it and the use of pronouns and subjects and things and names and things of this nature, when it intends to be a formal name of a person or God in this matter, the he is capitalized, okay? Now, verse 14, and it shall be a pulpit and a stone upon which to dash oneself, and for a rock upon which to stumble, for the two houses of Israel. Who are they? Ephraim and Judea, namely. Okay? So we talk about the future unification of Israel in one stick, but now we're talking about the two houses of Israel in conflict, adversarial conflict. Okay? Because of jealousy between the king of Judea and the king of northern Israel or Samaria, who came to be for a snare and a trap for the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And literally, the inhabitants of Jerusalem were eventually trapped, within the walled, fortified city of Jerusalem, during the time of King Hezekiah. Now, verse 15, and many shall stumble upon them and fall and be broken and be trapped and caught. Verse 16, bind this warning, seal the Torah in my disciples. Christians get caught up and word salads, like in Psalms and Tehillim, where King David is speaking, son of God and things like that. Listen, disciples are sons of God. Sons of God, anytime God says, you are my son, or son of man, like to Ezekiel, son of man, what that means is that we are obeying the will of God, and we are living the Torah's truths and 613 mitzvot in our lives in daily decision making. So we are disciples of God. We are sons and daughters of God in this context, okay? Verse 17, and I'll end it here. And I will wait for the Lord who hides his countenance from the house of Yaakov, and I will hope for him. Folks, what this is talking about pretty much is this day and time. God hid his face from Israel because of their sin. And as far as stumbling block and everything else, remember, when God created the heavens, the earth, and all life and everything else throughout the universe, okay, he created both good and evil, okay? He created Hasatan as his adversarial prosecuting attorney to bring evidence before the court of Shamaim, the holy courts of Shamaim, and then to prosecute men's virtue. This stumbling block, yes, God allowed Israel to destroy itself through its own sin, and that all the adversarial mischief caused by Satan and the kings of the world and the foreign powers and everything else, that is, when you become, your child can become a stumbling block to your leadership as a father in the home, right? Yeah, sometimes those stumbling blocks takes you to prison, at worst. But this has nothing to do with Mashiach. This has nothing to do with Messiah. Now, I understand there was allusions throughout the entire scroll of Isaiah, the entire book of Isaiah, about the Messiah or the Anointed One. Listen, King Cyrus II, of Persia, was referred to as the Anointed One or as a pseudo-Mashiach that would be used by God who listened to God. Namely, the reading of these passages here during Jewish exile during that time, to let Ezra and the remnant of Jews, the hope of Israel, to return to Jerusalem and then continue teaching and reading the Torah and sacrificial offerings and cleansing of the temple. There's nothing in here about Jesus. Now, honestly, the way I read this is word for word English translation from ancient Hebrew. Does this sound like I'm talking about Jesus here? This is how you read something in proper context. Now, if I am Jim Jones with the Davidian branch cult, or Davidians, or other Heaven's Gate, or all the other cults that's been out there before, and false messiahs and everything else, you will pick and choose verses to your religious bias and create a straw man argument saying this is true when it's nothing but Fupa is wrong. Listen, I love you all. Thank you for the comment you made me. You know who you are. Thank you. Hopefully I helped to answer some questions. Listen, you can quote the Sanhedrin tractate all you want to. Listen, the whole Talmud is full of 2,000 or more scribes and sages, debates and opinionated things, going back and forth, going back to the Gemara more times than not. The Gemara essentially is group consensus that the Torah is right and God is right. There's no need to add or subtract anything from God's holy books. He says don't do it. We shouldn't do it. And we should not go and create multiple images of God and put them on his face and say this is true. Well, God bless you. Shalom Aleichem. Until the next time. If you've enjoyed this program, please click like and subscribe.